There was a knock at the door, and when my aunt answered, she found four policemen on the doorstep. So she was.
This story begins with me, Will O'Brien. My whole life, I've always been surrounded by great friends, played lots of sports, and as well, been fortunate enough to have a large, amazing family that have all grown up in Canada. With this being said, I've always wondered where I'm from and how my ancestors came to Canada. After reaching out to some family members, I was able to get my grandma to sit down and explain some of our heritage to me. And so begins a journey to Canada.
So hi, Grandma. How are you today?
Good, thank you. How are you, William?
I'm good. I was just sort of wondering if you could help me talk about a little bit about our heritage.
That's
So
fine.
I guess we'll start off. I know my mom was telling me you're from Montreal, but where was your mother from?
From Waterford, Ireland. She was born in 1900 in Ireland. And she lived on a farm. By the time she was 12, both her parents had died. Her mother had died from influenza, and her father had had a very serious accident. He fell, hit his head on a huge doorknob in their home, and bled to death. So it was very unfortunate. And then her life was very sad because the family split up completely. A different member. She was the youngest, so she went to live with an aunt and uncle. But she had one sister who moved to the US and a brother who moved to the US, and the oldest brother stayed on the farm. My mother went to school in Dublin. She went to Teachers College there. And one of the interesting stories is that her math teacher was Eamon de Valera, and he became one of the first prime ministers of Ireland. And she and her friends were going from where they were staying over to the Teachers College. They had to go by boat across a bay. And because the IRA were fighting the British and there were soldiers all around the water, when they got on the boat to go over to school, they had to hang up a big white flag to let everybody know that they weren't involved in the war and they weren't part of the fighting groups. Most people from Ireland did have a great interest in how the IRA were doing and whether or not they were going to gain their independence. But the reason she had no interest is she told me that one night she spent the entire night sitting up with a girl whose brother was going to be hanged the next morning. And she said, from those days on, I just never wanted to hear about it again. I had no interest in it. There was, too much sadness and too many people being killed. And it was not anything she wanted to ever even hear about. Okay, when she left Teachers College, I think she taught for a little while in Ireland, but then as an adventure, she decided to go to Scotland to teach, and she went to a place called Dunfermline, where they needed a teacher. It's about 20 miles outside Edinburgh, and she worked there. And it was there that she met my dad, and he was, I think, in his 20s then, and he decided that really life in Scotland was even harsher than in Ireland maybe, and the only thing he could do, he either had a choice of working in the coal mines or leaving. So he decided he would immigrate to Canada. He went to Ottawa first and then later to Montreal. Hard because it was difficult to find a job, and that's why he moved from Ottawa to Montreal, which maybe wasn't a bad decision in the end, but I'm sure it was very harsh. What he did was he saved his money, and when he had enough money and could afford it, he got an engagement ring and sent it back to Ireland or to Scotland to my mom, who was there, so as she would come and meet him in Canada and join him.
I know you had, so I guess, roots in Ireland and Scotland from your parents. Did you have any connection to relatives in Ireland, maybe aunts and uncles?
We did have some connection with the Irish relatives who had moved to the US. So we had the aunt who was a nun in South Dakota, and we had an uncle in New York City. Now, my aunt, who joined this Irish Presentation Sisters, taught school during the fall and the winter semesters, but every year just before school started, she was allowed to visit her family. So she would come to Montreal to see us and then travel to New York to see the other brother, Uncle Bill. There was an interesting incident that occurred during one of her visits because in New York it was Prohibition days, and my Uncle Bill was a bootlegger, and his home was filled with liquor. One evening, he and his wife went out for dinner, leaving my aunt at home. There was a knock at the door, and when my aunt answered, she found 4 policemen on the doorstep. So she was rather panicky. She could see the headlines in the newspaper the next day saying, you know, none found in bootlegging establishment or whatnot. She thought, oh, this is going to be terrible. But much to her surprise, the policemen were very friendly and told her it was okay. They'd come back for another time to visit with my uncle and have a drink with him. And that was the end of it. So it was a surprise ending.
So, thank you, Grandma. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to talk to me. Sure have learned a lot about my heritage and sort of the journey to Canada and kind of the hard times that your parents and even a little bit of yourself had to go through. And I really appreciate, again, you taking the time out of your day to talk to me.